So, in terms of the engagement of stakeholders through the journey, I think it happened in multiple ways, and there's been multiple touch points as well. And there are different stakeholder groups. The employers are first and foremost, and they're represented largely by the peak industry groups, the Business Council, Australian Industry Group, Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and then other peak industry groups as well. But there's also very strong women's advocacy groups and lobby groups, Chief Executive Women, the Champions of Change Coalition, for example, and many that have been working for many years to improve gender equality in the broader context and in our context in the workplace. So there's been multiple touch points in relation to during the review. They had the capacity to make a submission in relation to what they thought needed to be changed. In the pulling together of the first piece of legislation and roundtables, surveys, submissions, a whole set of mechanisms of different ways that input could be provided. And one of the things we've liked to do is go out relatively early with a model and test, rather than present a fait accompli and people feel like they're only being asked to sort of consulted on the margins in relation or being consulted on something that's already been decided. For this piece of legislation, because the timing was actually reasonably tight, there wasn't an exposure draft, but there was a Senate committee. And so, it was really a third major touch point on a major piece where, and the Senate committees regularly do look at the legislation. Once again, an opportunity for people to have input, for the Parliament to interrogate aspects of it and check different pieces. And so I think that journey was important. I think also, though, it's important to say that the media was quite important in this context as well, and that aspects of the media did go to those peak groups and said, "What do you think?" And so the industry peaks having to articulate in the context of a heightened support for gender equality, their position, and if they had some concerns, enabled both an accountability and a commitment from them in terms of the progress, but also an articulation where they had concerns that then, either through WGEA or the government, there was able to be, sort of further conversations and engagement and addressing. So my experience, not just on this, but across the board is, members of Parliament do look to those who are going to be affected by legislation to give advice on whether it works or not. And so, for any policy, it is so much stronger when it's informed by those who are impacted on it. And so by the time this bill was in the Parliament and in the Senate committee, there was fairly significant support, and there were some questions raised at the margins, of which we had considered, and when asked in the Senate inquiry, we were able to give responses to, in terms of, yes, there's some impact in terms of business, but the benefits overwhelmingly, surpass the impact that it's going to, the small amount of additional burden that would be created. CEOs were being interviewed on the 7:30 report at night, or talked to by the Fin Review or the papers or the radio or whatever it might be, and starting to talk beyond the base equal pay discussion to engaging on we haven't been able to recruit our pilots at Qantas are the highest paying roles, and we haven't been able to recruit or train women into those. Okay, so what are you going to do? And what we hope as we publish each year is that conversation will continue to evolve. What we've heard from employers after the fact, so had a great response. We've had a lot of engagement with where we publish the information. We've doubled the number of people. We get thousands of views on that every month in terms of people using it. Employers are telling us that it is an ongoing conversation in their workplace, that their employees are having discussions. They want to understand it, what the difference is, why it's different to equal pay, what's driving it. And even prospective employees are asking about the gender pay gap of a company when they go for job interviews. So they need to be able to articulate it. And what that's meant internally is the literacy on gender equality has actually improved from the leadership throughout the organisation, and HR and D&I professionals particularly, because they've had to be able to communicate and educate and support the uplift. And they continue to engage as they learn more about it, learn the drivers, and put action plans into place for how they're going to drive the change. So the review was done. The review was done very extensively. Consultation was widely encouraged, roundtables. I think the both employers, and the peak groups and the sector, in terms of the broader women's sector, all felt that it was accessible and engaged and they can contribute. And from a Wooldridge perspective, while it was about us, we felt a very high level of responsibility to articulate what we thought needed to be changed. And we actually made a strategic decision to release our submission to the review early, because we knew that others were looking to us for ideas. And so in releasing our submission early, we did find that many key players were able to read our submission and accentuate in their submissions the things that we'd recommended that they also felt was important. When the review was presented to government, government subsequently accepted all the recommendations and funded us as an agency in the March 2022 budget prior to the federal election to be able to get on and do the work. So when there was a change of government, and it was very clear that the current government in their election promises had made commitments around publishing gender pay gaps, not to the full set of recommendations, but and the election had a lot of context of gender equality in terms of the debate. Over a period of time, the government determined that they would also commit to the full 10 recommendations, and we were off and running, which was great. But I think one of the other things that was important is in 2012, the business community did not support the original Workplace Gender Equality Act. They thought it was a burden on business, and it is. It does. There is a burden associated with reporting, but there's a benefit as well. And in fact, the Parliament was quite divided, and the legislation only got up by 3 votes. So it was, I think, from a fairly vocal, business community in relation to it. Fast forward to 2023, and the environment has fundamentally changed. And it's back to that point. I think we were able to work constructively with the business peaks and the business community about why it's important, articulating the work we were doing to try and reduce the burden as well. But all of the business groups came out supportive of the legislation, which I think gave a level of comfort to the Parliament as well, that it was important, that the environment was changed, that we have an expectation in relation to accelerating change.